welcome to our lecture. We are covering personality this week. It's really interesting information, so I hope that you've enjoyed reading about it. We are going to cover a variety of different theories this week and personality assessment. Like with most facets within our field, we have our basic theories and we apply those in different ways depending on the topic and the focus of the theory. So important definitions to learn for this week. One is character. So character refers to value judgments made about a person's morals or ethical behavior. So don't confuse that with personality. Character is a piece of personality. So it's the value judgments made by the person's moral or ethical behavior. And temperament is kind of the basis for personality. So temperament are the enduring characteristics to which a person is born with. So it's those genetic influences, and then the prenatal influences. And then there's a combination of those makes up the temperament. And this can be anything like irritability or adaptability. So that basic temperament that a child is born with is their basis for their personality. And then things like character come into play to develop one's personality. So personality is the unique way in which an individual thinks, acts, or feels throughout their life. So it's an individual, how they think, act, or feel throughout their life. And so that's what personality is. Personality within our field is a very new, or relatively young field, part of this field anyway. And so because it is so challenging to measure, and to measure in a scientific manner. So we're going to cover a few, like I said, different perspectives. Of course, the psychoanalytic or psychodynamic perspective, behaviorist, humanist trait, and then, of course, biology. So we always start with Freud. It's important, when you look at Freud's theory, it's important to understand the era into which he lived in which he developed this theory. So Freud lived in the Victorian age. Religion and the church were very influential within people's lives, and sexual intercourse was only used within the context of marriage and only to create offspring. So any enjoyment in sexual activity was a sin. Therefore, husbands, didn't engage with their wives in a sexual manner unless they were trying to have a baby. And so the husband would father several children with his wife. However, he couldn't, quote unquote, use her for sexual gratification. He would use a mistress. So he would have intercourse with his wife to have children, but then he found sexual gratification in a mistress. And of course, for women, often there's an emotional connection between intercourse and feeling connected to your partner. It's that emotional connection between the physical and the act and the emotion. And so to not have this with their husband created a lot of anxiety. And that's why women of upper class would seek out help. And a lot of them would see Freud. And so he developed this theory based on the clients he saw in his practice with this inability to have their sexual needs met, and they had issues emotionally with being unable to connect with their husband. And so Freud came up with three basic parts of the mind. There's the conscious mind, and most people during this era didn't have an issue with the conscious mind. They agreed with him that there's awareness that people have. And then there's even the preconscious mind, and people didn't necessarily have a problem with that either, because there are thoughts and memories and experiences that you can bring up pretty easily from this preconscious place. It isn't quite there in that conscious, but you can bring up those memories if you need to or want to. And so people were good and understanding of that. However, Freud also thought there was this unconscious mind. so that there was this underlying impact and influence on our behaviors. And this was very different than what most people thought during his lifetime. And so people didn't necessarily accept this right away. But Freud believed that this part of the mind was hidden at all times, and it surfaced only symbolically in dreams or in behavior without people knowing that it was there. And so with these three levels of the mind, Freud also developed his theory to discuss personality development. And within that, he came up with 3 different personality structures. And so the 3 of these parts interact with each other to create and develop a person's personality. And so the first level is the id. So this is kind of like the infant. This is unconscious, it's pleasure-seeking, it's a moral part of the personality that exists at birth. It's really the biological drive. So it wants to satisfy hunger, thirst, preservation, sexual desires. Anything like that is in the id. So any desire that's at a biological level is going to be in this part of the personality. And it's called the pleasure drive. People are pleasure-seeking creatures. And so even as infants, we seek comfort and pleasure. And infancy, like sucking on a hand or a pacifier or anything like that, anything they can put into their mouth, it creates comfort, it creates safety, it creates pleasure. And so people and infants do that. So even very, very young children are seeking pleasure, of course. Infants are demanding, they're irrational, they're illogical, they're impulsive. And so they want their needs met now, and they don't really care about what's going on with anyone else or anything in their environment. But just because we know that infants are this way, it doesn't actually support Freud's theory. What Freud did was he saw this in his environment and created his theory to fit what he saw. And so there's no testable part of this. However, the id is really the pleasure principle. And so there's this desire for immediate gratification of needs with no regard for the consequences. So it can really just be summed up with, if it feels good, do it. But along comes the ego, so it's the second part of the personality. And this is kind of the executive director. And so as infants begin to grow and develop, adults start denying them their every wish. And so, according to Freud, people have to come up with a way to deal with this reality that they're not always going to have their needs met immediately. And so that's the development of the ego. And so this is the conscious part. This is the rational and the logical piece of the personality. It's called the reality principle, which it has to satisfy the demands of the id, but only in ways that will not lead to negative consequences. And so that means that the ego decides to deny the id its desires if the consequences are too painful or too unpleasant. And so this can be summed up with a statement of, if it feels good, do it, but only if you can get away with it. But like I said, there's a third part of this personality that comes in. And so around preschool age, children start to develop a superego. And the superego is when children start to learn rules and customs and expectations of society. So the superego is the part that makes people feel prideful when they do the right thing and guilt or moral anxiety when they do the wrong thing. And so the 3 of these pieces interact together to create the personality. The id makes demands. The superego puts restrictions on how those demands can be met. So the ego has to come up with a plan on what will quiet the id but satisfy the superego. And sometimes you can't do both things. And so this results in a lot of anxiety for the ego. So it's constantly in this flux, this personality flux, to try to meet the needs of the id and the superego. And when these don't happen, people can develop defense mechanisms to deal with anxiety. So there's the ego kind of in the middle of the id and the superego. superego trying to reduce anxiety.